So we've got Rita, Lynn, Jessica.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Concordia Student Union Legal Information Clinic presentation on permanent residency, and particularly changes in Quebec immigration law, as well as federal immigration law. Before we start off, I'd like to do the territorial acknowledgement. As you all know, we at Concordia University are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanakahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We at the CSU respect and continue connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relations with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So to continue, my name is Walter Chian Tom. I am the manager and supervising lawyer of the CSU Legal Information Clinic. We are very honored to have with us today Maitre David Chalk. Maitre Chalk is a graduate of McGill University with the civil law bachelor degree, and as well a Juris Doctorate in common law from York University and Osgoode Hall. Maitre Chalk is also a member of the Quebec Bar Association and Association Québécoise des Avocats et Avocates de l'Immigration, otherwise known as ACADI. Maitre Chalk has been an executive member of the association from 1999 until 2015, serving at least 6 terms as vice president and 2 terms as president. As well, Maitre Chalk is a member of the Canadian Bar Association, having been involved in consultative committees with governments of Canada and Quebec, and a speaker and moderator at many, many conferences and training sessions for other immigration lawyers. In fact, as we say among immigration law, Maitre Chalk is a lawyer's lawyer. And then finally, Maitre Chalk has been named by other lawyers and chosen as one of Canada's best lawyers in immigration law for 5 consecutive years since 2012. And most happily, Maitre Chalk is also a member of the Legal Information Clinic Legal Network, which provides guidance to our law student volunteers at the CSU, and helps us with any professional files that we refer to them. And I guess the last point is that Maitre Chalk takes on private files. His devotion to access to justice is admirable, and along those same lines, his legal fees are very fair and they're very transparent and clearly spelled out to the clients from the outset. So that being said, I'd like to turn this over to Maitre David Chalk. Maitre Chalk.
Yes, thank you, Walter, for that very gracious introduction. I see we have a nice little group here today, and I'm going to try to make this a little bit interactive. So we'll stop at the end of every section for questions, and feel free to fire them off. We got a lot of stuff to cover. I understand that there are a number of things I'm going to have to sort of run over pretty quickly because we don't have enough time to do an entire immigration law course on all these different immigration programs. But the idea is to focus on the things that you folks at the CSU Legal Clinic are most likely to see and that are most likely to be helpful for you in your day-to-day. So just to explain the title of today's presentation, we are experiencing a kind of interesting year this year, 2022. You may have read in or heard about in the media numbers that are just sort of growing every month, how big a backlog of applications we have. The number recently that's been out there is over 2 million. I want to dig down on that a little bit so you can have a more nuanced understanding of what that is and how it might affect, the people that you are going to be meeting in the coming year. I think it's maybe a little less alarming and a little less big than what that number might lead people to think. So
yeah, Mate Chalk, before we
Yep.
continue, I just want to make it clear that for people, if you have any questions, right, you must write that question in the chat, and then throughout the presentation, right, Mate Chalk will address those questions, but the questions must be written in the chat.
Yeah, fire those in though, and I will be absolutely happy to get to them and answer them the best that I can. So I'd like to begin with kind of an overview, the big picture of what is economic immigration. Well, what is immigration in Canada? What are the different streams? So you will see from the second level that there are essentially 3 streams of immigration, and the one that we're going to be talking about is the economic class. So we're not going to deal with refugees or family class and humanitarian applications. So within economic class, you have skilled workers on the federal side that feed in through 2 streams. One is express entry, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is, which splits off into 4 programs, and we will deal with those one by one. Also, you have another class of provincial nominees. Those are the province's own sort of homemade programs that are tailored to deal with their own particular needs in the province, generally in terms of their workforce. Again, because every province has their own programs, we're not going to deal with those. The important thing to know about those, though, is that they are the product of administrative agreements between the provinces and the federal government. And then we have Quebec. Now, we'll talk about this more in detail, but the Quebec selection stream is actually quite different because unlike the others, it's not the product of administrative agreements, but is actually the product of laws. And within that, you've got 2 substreams, which is the Quebec Experience Program and the Travailleurs Qualifiés Québec, Quebec Skilled Workers, the regular program. And 2 branches of the Quebec Experience Program, one for international students and the other for temporary workers. Again, we're going to get to all of these. Let's begin a little bit with the federal side. And that's a side that you're likely to get asked questions about. Unfortunately, in some cases, because the requirements for Quebec are maybe now becoming difficult to the point where they are going to discourage a certain percentage of Concordia graduates, and also because traditionally there has been interest in these programs amongst Quebec Anglophone University graduates for these programs. So I think it's important to know in a general sense what the programs are and who is likely or unlikely to qualify. So you may have heard something about express entry, and express entry is a bit misunderstood. People often talk about it like it's a program, but it's not a program. It's a tool. It's a way to take in applications, economic immigration applications in those 4 programs that we mentioned earlier, which really are programs. And it's all done via an online platform. So the process begins with an individual creating what's called an expression of interest. That's where they go online and they go on the IRCC, that's Canadian Immigration, their website, and they create a profile for themselves. And they tell IRCC information about their language ability, age, education, training, work experience, both in Canada and out of Canada, all sorts of things, which then generate what's called a CRS score. That's called a comprehensive ranking score. And also, it allows the software to evaluate whether the person, after they've entered their information, qualifies for one of those four programs. One of those programs being Canadian Experience Class, which is one, federal skilled worker program, and the federal skilled trade program. So if you qualify in one of those, you go into what's called the pool, the express entry pool, and you are given a ranking score, a CRS score. The federal government then goes on and sends invitations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, to people to make applications, and those applications again are made via the express entry platform. And at the end of the line, what the applicant is hoping for is a permanent resident visa. So amongst those, the different programs, we'll talk now about the programs that feed into express entry. The one that's most likely to be of interest to Concordia or McGill grads or even CEGEP grads is the Canadian Experience Class. So there's a couple of important baseline requirements. And the first one is that the applicant must have at least 12 months of full-time or equivalent part-time skilled work experience in Canada while legally authorized to do so. And that work experience has to be acquired in the 3 years prior to the expression of interest. That's that first part where they create that profile. They must have that work experience either not at a time when they were a full-time student or when they were self-employed, because that work experience will not be accepted. And the skilled work has to be at a certain level under the Canadian National Occupational Classification, occupational classification, or the NOC as we call it. And it has to be one of the higher levels, which would be either a professional job, managerial job, technical job, or a skilled trade. Again, we'll get into that a little bit more later, how the NOC works. They also have to meet the minimum language requirements for the job performed. Now, for the Canadian Experience Class and the Federal Skilled Worker Program, that is level 7 of the Canadian language benchmark. And that, broadly represents the ability to have a conversation and read and write relatively fluently, but not necessarily perfectly. If the application is being made in this federal skilled trade program, because I guess the government is of the view that those skilled trades require less language skills, you can go all the way down to level 5 of the benchmarks, which is a little more rudimentary ability to speak, read, write, and understand English or French. Now, just as I was saying, we'll talk a little bit about the National Occupational Classification. By the way, this is a tool. In theory, every job in Canada is classified somewhere on the National Occupational Classification. It's also important to know, by the way, that I am, and not intentionally and not with ill intent, giving you right now slightly outdated information. Because one thing you need to know about the NOC is it's updated every 5 years. So we've had a NOC in 2006, 2011, 2016, and now, if you're following the trend, 2021. IRCC, for the most part, is still using the NOC from 2016, but there has been a fairly major overhaul, the first one in a while in 2021, and that actually creates not the 4 skill levels I'm showing you here, but a 5th skill level. So just be aware that somewhere down the line, you're going to have to be looking at the NOC 2021 skill levels. But they are broadly similar to the 2016 levels, and which were exactly the same as the previous versions of the NOC. So at the top of the hierarchy, You've got management positions. Those are level 0, which aren't mentioned here because it's unusual that somebody goes straight from university to a management position. But then after that, you've got professional jobs. These are jobs which normally require a university degree to do them, like doctors, dentists, engineers, computer programmers, translators, things like that. Also, university research assistants and things like that would be level A. Then at level B, you have technical jobs and skilled trades. So these are positions for which a college diploma or some kind of apprentice training is required. And it is quite broad. It ranges from chefs, electricians, plumbers, administrative assistants to registered nurses. And then below that, and now we're starting to slip down to a level where you are no longer getting credit for the purpose of the federal programs, is intermediate level jobs, which require high school or some job specific training. Again, examples are butchers, bartenders, dental assistants, retail salespersons, nurses, aides. So again, it's really important when you're assessing somebody to know the difference between a registered nurse and a nurse's aide. Or actually I put butchers, but that's not quite right, because a retail butcher would be at skill level B, but somebody who works at a plant where they're doing industrial butchering is level C. So you've got to be pretty careful in using this, and it's important to look at the alternative job titles to make sure that the one that you think that corresponds to the person's work experience is really the most appropriate. So at the bottom level, you have what they call labor jobs, which require short-term or on-the-job training, no formal level of education, examples being cleaning and maintenance staff, janitors, oil field workers, cashiers, etc. So in each classification, it's based on the work that's performed. And it's not only the requirements. So you don't look at the title, don't get hung up on the titles in there. You may have a person whose job title is a certain thing, but whose duties aren't at all that thing under the NOC. So the NOC is a subject you could spend a lot of time on. Just be alive to those differences if you're actually working with it. There is an online version of it, which is very searchable. And just as I said, be sensitive to the alternate titles and make sure you're really getting the right one. So once you've got your 1 year of full-time work experience in a level 0 or a B position, and you've got your 1 year, and then that's continuous, or you have the equivalent part-time, then you need to make sure you have CLB level 7 for all 4 abilities in English or French. Now, that's not the overall score, it's the individual scores, because if you've seen the language test results, you have a transcript with a score for each skill. You really need to have the equivalent of level 7. And on, again, the IRCC website will tell you what score on which test is equivalent to, it equates to what level on CLB. And also, as a minimum requirement, you must have at least a Canadian secondary or post-secondary equivalent, diploma or degree, or the equivalent. So how do you know if something is equivalent? The federal government has accredited some private organizations, the biggest one being WES, to determine that. So that's a pretty straightforward process for most people involved, paying WES a little money, sending them the diploma and the transcript, and you get a result back fairly fast. So to get, remember, the first step of this is to create your profile, and then the software, IRCC software, if it's assessing you against the Federal Skilled Workers Program, is going to subject your application to to a point system. And there are 100 points out there, and a pass is 67. So again, you don't go into the pool as a federal skilled worker with less than 67 points. The different criteria, then you have somewhat different criteria in the Federal Skilled Trades Program. That focuses on the skilled trades that are deemed to be in demand in Canada, and in the past that's included chefs and cooks, butchers and bakers, industrial, electrical, construction trades. So it's not every trade that could be considered a skilled trade that's necessarily on the list. Again, you have those lower language requirements for them, level 5 for speaking and listening, and only level 4 for reading and writing. And unlike the other programs where you need 1 year of full-time work experience or the equivalent, In this one, you need 2 years, and it has to be in one of those trades that's on the list, but it can be going back as far as 5 years rather than 3 years for your expression of interest. And also, you must have a valid job offer in the skilled trade for which you're under which you're trying to apply, and it has to be an offer for at least a year, or what's called a certificate of qualification in the skilled trade. So those are credentialing processes that the provinces have put in place. It varies from province to province. Again, it's a little too busy to get into the details. Janie, I see you asking for the slides. I believe that those are going to be available at the end. In the past, they always have been. Shouldn't be a problem. So the first stage is you have to get into the pool, qualifying either in Canadian experience, federal skilled worker, or federal skilled trade. Once you're there, once you've qualified, and you may qualify in more than one program, not uncommon, actually technically possible to qualify in all three. It happens. And the software will then subject your data to processing and generate a ranking score. So the scores vary depending on whether you are applying as a single candidate or as a couple. Now, I should note that somebody who is a member of a couple, meaning that they are either married or in a common law relationship, is not technically required to apply at the same time as their spouse or common law partner. But there may be valid reasons for not wanting to apply for both at the same time. We'll deal with that again a little further into the presentation. So what you see on this breakdown of how the points are distributed, that there are huge amounts of points for either having 600 if you're a provincial nominee. Again, that means you've applied prior to going into express entry into one of the province's programs, and they have given you what's called a nomination certificate, meaning that they are asking the federal government, they are nominating you to the federal government for permanent residence. Also, there are points, much fewer, 50 to 200, if you have a validated job offer. We can talk about how you get those points. It's not simply having a letter offering you the job, it's a bit more than that, but there's much smaller numbers of points for that. Are there points, Charles Gao asked, are there points for self-employed people? So Charles, on the federal side, I'm sorry to say that there are and there aren't. It's a complicated thing. So you cannot, remember the requirement, for example, was that 1 year of experience, 1 year of experience to get into, for example, Canadian experience class. And that, as I mentioned, cannot be self-employed. The government of Canada does have a fairly lengthy page explaining who is self-employed. But then you can get points for work experience. We can get into that a little later. So what you're looking at now, because Grace is not sure, you are looking at the comprehensive ranking system. So this is federal. Chanyi, we are not talking about Quebec yet at all. That's coming later. We'll get to Quebec. But until now, everything I'm saying is only about the federal program, not the Quebec program. I hope that's clear. So Grace has asked, how do you get a provincial nomination? Great question, Grace. So you have to apply to the province. It's a totally separate application. Some of the provinces have fees for some of their applications, some don't, but it's really something you're dealing with the province that in particular with. Often it requires that you either have studied or worked or at least have a job offer in that program. Exceptionally, in some cases, you can get it with by having qualifications for a particular occupation. But in the context of a relatively short presentation like this, I just can't get into all those provincial programs. That's a job and a half. That would require a couple full day sessions. But basically what you need to understand here is that unless you have, so you're looking at this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about CRS scores a little further in the presentation, that you've got 600 points available for skill transferability down here, and for skills and experience factors, such as the big one. So it's education, language proficiency, Canadian work experience, and age. Those are the big ones. And then you have skill transferability, which is combinations, which we'll look at before, of all of those things that we mentioned earlier. And unless you have a nomination or a validated job offer, you're really living in a 600-point CRS universe. So here's what's been happening. Remember, I said at the beginning of this presentation that it's hard to tell whether we're in a big sleep period. So all of the programs that I mentioned to you before, with the exception of PNP, have essentially been on a hold for a while now. If you look at my little list here, the last draw, the last time the government of Canada sent out any invitations in anything except the provincial nominees goes all the way back to September of last year. So that's 8 months ago now. And that draw, if you see the number of invitations was 1,002, was a small draw. And you will see that the minimum CRS score for that draw was 713, meaning you had to have a validated job offer or something else to get up such a high score. That's a super high score. Now, in the PNP, you see the CRS scores for the different draws are always over 600. Well, that's obvious because the fact that you have the nomination gives you 600 points to begin with. But the point of this little graphic is just to show you that for all intents and purposes, IRCC has not been taking in new applications in express entry for a while. And I mean, I personally have been consulting with at least one Concordia grad who's ready to go, who wants to apply, who's got their work experience now, and is just waiting to get invited, but is not going to get invited until they start inviting people in the programs other than the PNP, and the nomination scores go down. He's got, I think, in the low 500s, which is a pretty good score. So I showed you a little bit before how a more normal period, which was July, August 2021. And in July and August 2021, you can see on August 19th, IRCC did a draw in Canadian experience class where they required a pretty low CRS score of only 403, and that was a draw of 3,000. An identical size draw took place 2 weeks before that with, again, a low CRS score of 404. And you had another Canadian experience class draw July 22nd, 2021. This one, 4,500, so a pretty big one, where a 357 score was there. So what was happening there, just to interpret this for you for a little bit, because traditionally, you don't know this, but traditionally we would tell people, unless you have a CRS score of 450 or better, you really didn't have much of a chance. What was happening is, because the government of Canada during COVID was only looking to bring in people who are already inside Canada, they wanted to keep the program functioning. In order to keep the numbers moving, they were lowering the requirements on their CRS scores significantly. So just know that going forward, it's 450 and often 460. That is kind of the baseline for having any chance of success in that pool. So here's the strange thing that happened. This is coming back again to what I was saying about the title of this talk. IRCC, starting in 2015, gave it tools that allow it not only to process the control, not only the way they process applications once they're received, but allowed it to control very precisely, if they want to, the number of new applications that come in. And the objective they had in doing this, they said, okay, so we're not gonna let everybody who wants to apply make an application. You have to go, have to get in the pool and wait for your invitation. But we promise that once you are selected from within the pool, you're sent an invitation and you respond to that. Once you respond to that and submit your application to us through Express Entry, in 80% of all cases, we are going to try to process those applications to completion. So that was a fantastic change, actually, for all the things we didn't necessarily like about IRCC having control of who could apply and who couldn't. Nobody was unhappy with that 6 months processing time. So I have Rahul asking me a question. Sorry, I'm just going to pause. So he's asking if you need a separate validated job offer for CEC. No, you don't need a validated job offer for CEC. You may need the points for a validated job offer to get an invitation. Letter of employment suffices to get CRS points. No, that is not correct, Rahul. There are actually no points for a letter. You can take as a rule of thumb in Canadian immigration that a letter equals 0 points. There's always a government process where a job offer has to be validated in some way, meaning they're going to look at it, see it's genuine, see that it's for a position where there's genuine need before any points come from that job offer. And so Mehul is asking whether for a federal skilled worker and CEC draws will open in July. Well, I don't know. My crystal ball is a little fuzzy, but that's what Minister Fraser has said. He has said that starting in July, we'll go back to having some sort of draws. But let's come back to understanding the situation. So on the one hand, IRCC has had now for about 7 years very precise tools to make sure that it only takes in as many applications as it can process in 6 months generally to give that good processing time. And they had a change of mentality. They had to change mentality, they thought, during the pandemic to focus on applicants already in Canada. So they did a few things to deal with that. As we saw before, they lowered the scores in order to keep the numbers up and meet their fairly ambitious targets for new permanent residents last year. That led to lowering CRS scores. So they did huge draws last year from February to July, where we were seeing CRS scores going from 357 to 419, and the draws were going from 4,500 to 6,000. Those are big draws. And then we had on the 13th of February 2021 the big surprise, where they did this huge draw of 27,000 plus invitations, and the CRS was only 75. So you can understand that that creates a real challenge from the department when they invite at the same time 27,000 people, whereas in the past, a big draw for them for a 2-week period would have been 6,000. So, it was no surprise when that started to affect processing time. The other thing was that they launched last year a program which is no longer in existence, called the TR to PR program, temporary residence to permanent residence. And that launched in May and closed in November last year. And it brought in about 70,000 applications. So again, a big number. Now, you don't need to really know about this program too much because it no longer exists and there are no indications right now that it's coming back anytime soon. But what you do need to know is what is the byproduct of those big draws that I'm talking about in the TR to PR program. So one byproduct, and again, coming back to the number you're hearing in the media, is we have 2 million people in our backlog right now. Well, yeah, but they're not all in the same programs. A lot of people in those numbers are applying for tourist visas or are applying for study permits, other things, or family class sponsorship. Certainly not all, not even a majority of those people are applying in as economic immigrants. So in express entry, as of April of last month, IRCC had a backlog of 45,000 persons, not applications, 80% of which are federal skilled workers. So remembering that during pandemic, they hardly processed any federal skilled worker applications. Those are pretty old applications. And it also means, I guess the good news in there, it means that out of all those big numbers that I was talking about for express entry in 2021, only 9,000 of those people came out of the in Canada draws in CEC. And they still had an inventory of 40,000 people in their TR to PR program. They have said that they will try to process all those applications by sometime next year. So that's more of a concern for people who are waiting for TR to PR applicant decisions. We at the time were hopeful that they would get a 6-month processing time. IRCC was very careful never to promise any processing time. And for some of those people, it may come out to 1.5 years or even more. So what's going to happen with this backlog? Well, the first thing that's happened is the federal government has thrown some money at it. They have promised to spend in the last budget $85 million to tackle those backlogs either this year and next year. And some of that money is going to modernize their technology, some of which is badly in need of modernization. But there's also funds to hire some new people to process applications. You should also know, and this has been in the news quite a bit, that some processing is not so much in permanent residence, more in temporary residence applications, but there is more and more processing in the city, even some almost decision making, something close to decision making that's being made by software via something that looks like, and some people would call artificial intelligence now. And we are seeing concretely some improvement in processing time pretty much across the board. So I'm not too cynical about that promise and the sincerity of it. And I don't think you should be either. I think there are reasons to be hopeful for better things going forward. And as I said earlier, the big proportion, that 80% in the express entry inventory that is federal skilled worker, is because those people generally were outside Canada, and those applications have been more challenging for IRCC, or so they say. And they also thought it was unfair to bring people into Canada to find housing and jobs and other things during the pandemic. Well, maybe they're right, maybe not, but maybe they're right. And again, as mentioned earlier, they have promised to start up CEC draws this summer again, but there's been a big buildup. There are lots of people who are waiting for those draws to start, and I think it's a reasonable bet that when they do start up again, at least in the first few draws, the CRS score that's going to be needed to qualify is going to be pretty high. Maybe it will start to fall back to something a little closer to what we traditionally had, the 460s, something like that, by the fall or the winter. So just so you have a feel for what a CRS score is, I sort of set up the points for a typical person with a little bit with enough work experience, just enough to consider making the application to qualify in CEC. So somebody who is more than 20 and under 29, has a bachelor's degree, has fluency in unofficial language. It can be either French or English, and has 1 year of work experience. Again, for CEC, these are all requirements. And they also, you'll see at the bottom, as we go a little further down, you see the points starting to come in for those combinations, the fluency in an official language plus a bachelor's degree. So there's 50 points there for a single applicant or in a couple. And also some points for that combination of Canadian work experience and education. So with a bachelor's degree and 1 year of work experience, there's 25 points there. In this case, I'm assuming that the person didn't have foreign work experience before coming to study in Canada, or so there are no points there for that combination of that, or the combination of foreign and Canadian work experience, but some applicants may have that. And again, there's bonus points. The education gets you multiple. The education in Canada, the work experience in Canada just keeps getting you more points. Here you've got another 30 points toward the bottom for that post-secondary education in Canada as a bachelor's degree. So in my hypothetical case, for a single applicant, the ranking score is 404. So Jenny asked a question about points for above 30. So this is just an example. There are points. You start to lose points when you hit 30, and you lose a little more points every year. So if you go and you look at the IRCC website, it will tell you for a particular age how many points. And IRCC has actually pretty good tools that will help you to score people if and when you need those. So I just wanted to also show you that the points, CRS points, also depend a little bit on the attributes of a spouse. So in this particular case, I have assumed that the spouse had a bachelor's degree and fluency in an official language and 3 years of Canadian work experience, assuming that the spouse had been working while the student was studying. But despite that, and despite it looks like a pretty good couple, maybe outwardly, 4 less ranking points than we would have for that single student. See, I see that Jenny has another question, which is, without application, I can use the tool to check your points. Yes, you can. We'll talk about it. You'll have the links in the presentation that will allow you to use IRCC's, what they call, they have a tool that helps you to calculate ranking scores. It's extremely useful. So in both cases that we looked, so the hypothetical person I was looking at had 400 or 404 points. That's in most points in history of express entry not going to be enough points to get an invitation. You need to be up around, you probably need another 50, maybe even 60 points. So where can you get those points? So you can get, for a second official language, and this is a fairly low level of ability, you can get another up to 6 points. Well, that by itself is not going to make a huge difference, but it helps. Every little bit helps. If you have more years of Canadian work experience, again, more points. So as you can, you're probably going to have a 3-year postgraduate work permit every year, so more points. If you get a second diploma, you can get somewhere between 7 and 30 points, depending on whether you're single or in a couple. So you could either do, and this is why, if you've seen in Canada sort of private colleges that offer 1-year diplomas flourishing, one of the reasons is people are looking to pick up those extra ranking points. And you can pick up extra points for, again, if you have that better education credential, you can get up to an additional 25 points if you have the right language ability. Also, again, with more experience, you can get more points if you have with more Canadian work experience. Also, you can pick up some points if you have a citizen, if the applicant has, and this is the applicant or their spouse or common law partner if they're applying as a couple, who has a sibling who is a citizen or permanent resident of Canada and lives in Canada. If you have just the simple fact of having pretty good skills in French, level 7 is getting you 15 points, even if you have low ability in English. But if you have pretty much fluent skills in French and the fairly basic knowledge in English, that's 30 points. And now arranged employment, there are an additional 50 points or 200 points. 200 points requires the position that is offered to be at a management level position. So unlikely to come up for most people, but it exists. So how do you get those 50 points? Because you're seeing that they can be, for some people, very important. Well, you have to have a job offer, and the employer has to either have applied for a labor market impact assessment, or somehow the employee is working for the employer on an employer-specific work permit, meaning it can't be a postgraduate work permit, which is an open permit. It must be one that names them. So normally that's a labor market impact assessment. And that means the employer has to show that they have done the necessary recruitment for the position. They couldn't find qualified person. They're paying the going rate for that job, that they're being good employers. They're not trying to bring in foreign cheap labor. So you were asking me before, someone was asking me before, okay, Kim is asking a question for the extra work experience points. Would knock a work experience before graduation be considered as well? No. If the work experience you get while you are working under a student permit never counts. Sorry. It seems unfair. I mean, it's good work experience. Most employers would recognize it as that, but doesn't work. No points. So here are some, you're welcome, Kim. Here are some useful sources. So the federal government website gives you information on who can apply as a federal skilled worker. You can see the points there. There is the link there for what they call their CRS tool. You just it's an interactive thing. You enter the data and it shows you the score. And it also allows you to work very nicely with different hypotheses. You say, oh, okay, so what if I improve my ability in French? How does that affect my overall thing? If I get another year of work experience, if I get another year of work experience in Canada, how does that affect my ranking score? An extremely useful tool, I find, anyway. For research on the NOC, you've got the link over there. And IRCC has lots of instructions in the form of operational manuals and bulletins. There you go. And also there's a more general sort of tool called Find Your NOC, which allows you to, theoretically at least, find what occupation you work or have worked under. Now, I would say that in terms of graduates who are interested in applying federally, the number one question I get, and I get it a lot, it's sort of a sub practice I have, is can I apply to a federal program while I'm living and working in Quebec? So let's imagine for a sec that a Concordia grad has gone on, they've worked, they've done their 1 year and let's say an NOC level A job, and they're qualified and they're given an invitation, but they're worried. They say, I know that one of the requirements, we haven't mentioned this, but it is an important requirement, is that I have and I satisfy IRCC that I have the intention to live outside Quebec. But I'm living in Quebec, and the only place in Canada I've ever really lived is Quebec. Is that, how do I deal with that? Am I allowed to make this application at all? And the answer is yes, because it's a question of intention. So the intention is the person has to satisfy the immigration officer about is that in the future, they are going to settle in a part of Canada that is not Quebec. Now we're talking about federal programs here, right? Obviously, it's the opposite for Quebec programs. But for a federal program, whether it's CEC or federal skilled worker or federal skilled trades, you have to convince an officer when asked to that you intend to live somewhere outside Quebec. Now, it actually has happened that somebody who was confused enough that they filled in their EE application and indicated that their intent was to settle in Quebec, and that, folks, is an automatic refusal. But we have the interesting case here, and this is a federal court decision, and this is the law, because in Canada, we're in a common law system where case decisions like this are law, and this is really the only decision that's ever been rendered on this point. And in Dhaliwal, Justice Diner, who was the judge who decided the case, said some really interesting things. But before I get to the interesting things he said, let me just say that when you're living and working in Quebec and you want to apply to a federal program, it's definitely in your interest to submit with your application a plan to explain to IRCC what is your plan to settle outside of Quebec, and to give them the documents that you might have that show your intention to do that. So, for example, you can't control when you get an invitation. It's an unknown thing, but you've got a lease, right? And they send you an invitation in the month of November, but your lease doesn't end till July. So you would be entirely reasonable to say, well, here's the proof. I am applying for jobs in province X that is not Quebec. And I have booked a mover for July 1st to move to that province. And I have friends there, and this is my plan. Give them whatever documents you can that will support that. Obviously, even better than that is where the person moves immediately to that province, leaves Quebec, once they know that they are on the way to becoming a permanent resident. But that's not the requirement. That's what we're going to look at right now. What is the actual requirement? So Justice Diner first begins with something that is kind of obvious, that this is about intention, and intention is inherently subjective. And because we don't have crystal balls, because officers can't look inside people's minds, they can only make decisions about intent, looking at their past conduct, present circumstances, and future plans, and making the best possible conclusions they can from that. But remembering this, and this is the part of the text that's in red, when somebody becomes a new permanent resident in Canada, they are subject to a residency obligation. And that obligation is 730 days, that's 2 years in Canada out of every 5 years. So what Justice Diner said was, well, if a person can come to Canada, sort of become a permanent resident on Monday, Tuesday, go back to whatever country they were in before that, and not come back for as long as 3 years, why can't someone stay in another part of Canada for as long as 3 years? And the answer is there's no reason. It wouldn't make sense otherwise. So when people ask me, when do I have to move to another province? My answer is, well, it's a two-part answer. First of all, first answer would be definitely within 3 years. And my second part of my answer is, how complicated do you want your life to be? And the reason I ask that question is, because as I said, the easiest thing to do to satisfy an officer is physically move to the other province. After that, there's a whole series of other things you can do to show an intention. But obviously, the farther out that intention is, the more difficult it is to convince an officer of that intention. But that's the law. And if you can show concretely, oh, I've got a contract to work in Quebec for another 2 years, and let's say, and my employer has promised, and here it is in writing, that in the 3rd year they're going to transfer me to Vancouver. Well, theoretically, that should normally satisfy an officer if the officer believes that's really what's going to happen. So before we get on to Quebec selection, which is the next topic, any other questions about these federal programs? No, I think I covered all the ones in the text. Okay, so let's move on to Quebec. So,
sorry, I just want to ask a question.
oh, but questions are through the text, if we can be so kind, if we can do it in writing, because that's what I'm following, and I think that's what Walter wanted us to do. So, okay, and he actually, I don't mind, but just throw that. I'll wait for that question, and then we'll get started on Quebec. Okay, so we got 2 raised hands. Okay, well, we might, okay, so the first question is whether you get more points if you speak English and French than just English. And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely you do. And if you speak really good French, as I was trying to show before, there's really a lot of points in there. That's a real benefit. So this is actually kind of a benefit that students who study in Quebec have, a competitive advantage they have, because they have generally a lot more opportunities to learn and to practice their French than students in other provinces. So if you can graduate, or at least come out of, you know, your first or second year working with the strong abilities in both official languages, you are definitely giving yourself a competitive advantage in the federal program. And Charles asks, someone planning to stay in Quebec, they should just apply through Quebec, not federally at all. No, Charles, that is actually the opposite of what I was trying to explain. So let me explain it better. I would say that someone planning to stay in Quebec. Oh, Walter's checking out. Okay, bye, Walter. Anyway, thanks for hanging in there as long as you did. So okay, sorry. Actually, Charles, the answer to your question is yes, I misread it. Somebody who's planning to stay in Quebec, and we're going to talk about those Quebec programs right now, absolutely should apply from Quebec, because that's the requirement. If you apply federally, it means you have an intention to settle outside Quebec. If you apply in Quebec, it means the opposite. Now, that doesn't mean once you're a permanent resident that you can't go somewhere else. Of course you can. You are a permanent resident. You have, under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what are called mobility rights. You can go wherever you want. But as long as on the day that you became a permanent resident, you had the intention to settle in the part of the country you were supposed to, so that's either Quebec or not Quebec, you are fine. Let's say, let me give you an example. Let's say I go through the federal skilled worker program, or the CEC, and I get my permanent residence, and I start working for a company in Ottawa. But 6 months later, I get a job offer from just across the bridge in the city called Gatineau, which is right beside, it's a twin city with Ottawa, and I'm moving across the border back into Quebec. That's not a problem, because when I became a permanent resident, my genuine intention was to go live in Ottawa, and even if I was ever questioned, I did that. I had no way to know that later I would get this nice offer in Gatineau. Not a problem. So Janie asks, if I speak English very well for my French level, fluent in French, get more points than basic level for French. I'm not sure what that question is. Hold on, let me read it again. Yes, you get, yes, the better you're, as you saw there, it's in the CRS ranking score, just for having a high level in French, even if you have no English, 30 points. And for combinations of strong French and English, the better you are in both languages, generally, I think as a rule of thumb, the more points you're going to get. Okay, are we ready to anything else? Are we ready to go on to Quebec programs? Okay, I'm going to assume yes. I'm not seeing more questions or indications that there's typing going on. So let's talk about Quebec. Oh, good question from Oslavia that I should have mentioned. Oslavia asked how current English test result has to be. In both Quebec, this answer I'm going to give you applies to both Quebec and the government of Canada. So it has to be not more than 2 years old. And you can go into the pool with a test. Let's say it's a year and 11 months old, but it stops being valid once you cross 2 years. So you may have to update it. Once you've applied, that data is locked in. Once you've accepted the application and applied. And Tamar asks, 2-year requirements for full-time position or equivalent. What do I mean by equivalent? Also, in some cases, the 2 years, Tamar, is for that federal skilled trades program. It's federal skilled worker. Well, it's 1 year, but what is an equivalent? Great question. And let me answer that before I get to Slavia's question. So full-time labor, whether it's in Canada or in Quebec, is considered to be a 30-hour work week. So any week in which you work 30 hours or more is a week of experience. But let's say I'm in a 20-hour a week position. So that means I should get credit for 2/3 of a week of experience. So to get 1 year of experience, I would need basically a year and a half. Slavia asked, do I need a valid English test even if all my bachelor and master tests were in English? Absolutely you do. Both the governments of Quebec and of Canada will not assess your language ability, with rare exception, the Quebec Experience Program, without a test result. So they each have their tests they like and some tests they don't like. Have to have recent test results. And if you want points in both French and English, you need to take both French and English tests. Amin asks, Amin says, Amin taught languages. Should I still prove my competence? That's my answer again. You may be a renowned playwright in one of those languages. Doesn't help you. You need to go out. You want points for a language, you have to do a standardized test. So Tamar, I'm not going to answer your question about citizenship because we're not doing citizenship today, maybe another session. 1+7 asks, work experience in Canada does account of working full-time during summer under a student visa. I guess you maybe missed the other part where I mentioned no work experience that you acquired where you're working under a study permit is considered either federally or in Quebec. Tamar asks again, Tamar, I think I can tell we're frustrating you. Yes, you always, your mother tongue can be English or French, and it might be both. You might have one parent with each language, and you might have done your thesis in one of the official languages at one time, and then another thesis in the other, and it doesn't get you squat. You need test results if you want points. That is the only way, and it's really, it's jumped revenues for these testing organizations enormously. It's become a booming business across Canada and probably more in Quebec than anywhere else. But that's how you do it. They don't want to guess. They don't want to surprise. No test result, no dice. So let's talk Quebec. As I mentioned earlier, Quebec is different from every other province in Canada because there is a law. The Accord Canada-Québec relatif à l'immigration et à l'admission temporaire des aubans, which sets out the powers that Quebec will have for immigration. And by the way, if you're following the news in provincial politics, the government of Quebec has been asking for all kinds of additional powers. And I'm not going to go into details here, but I'm just going to tell you that is a highly political ask because they have enormous powers already. And the ones they don't have, they probably couldn't use. Anyway, so in the economic class, Quebec has first to select a potential immigrant, which is done by the issuance of a certificat de sélection, a selection certificate. So the first part of the process is selection. That means that according to our criteria for an economic immigration, we have deemed that this person has met those. And we are telling the government of Canada through this document, this selection certificate, that we would like Canada to process this person as a permanent resident. And Canada still has to evaluate that person to see whether they are inadmissible for one reason or another. The main reasons we worry about are security, or criminality, meaning the person may have in the past had a criminal record, or security would be more they were associated with a group that makes us feel nervous about having them living amongst us, a terrorist group or something like that. Health, so let's say the person had a very unfortunate and expensive to treat condition that might make them what we call might create excessive demand on health services in Canada. Financial reasons, so they have to have enough money to support themselves after they come, or misrepresentation reasons. So if you are applying in Quebec, unlike the rest of Canada, unless you're applying through a PNP, you have to do 2 applications, not 1. You have to apply first for your selection certificate, and only after you get your selection certificate, you then go on to apply for permanent residence. And you have to pay fees for both of those too. So let's begin our consideration of the Quebec programs with the one that is by far the more popular of the 2. It's called the Quebec Experience Program. And the Quebec Experience Program has 2 components. One is for international graduates, and the other is for temporary workers. The other part of the program is what we call the regular skilled worker program. We'll talk about that too. We'll also be talking about the fact that it has really taken a back seat to the Quebec Experience Program in the last number of years, but may be ready for a little bit of a comeback, and for reasons that we'll explain. So let's begin with the regular program. So that is supposed to be, in the old days before the PEC existed, Quebec Experience Program. By the way, that's the acronym for the Quebec Experience Program, Programme d'Expérience Québécois. We're going to refer to it as the PEC, just to keep things short. So a skilled worker, the definition is a foreign worker who settles in Quebec to hold employment they are likely to be able to hold. And this is, again, a point assessment. So these applications now and for the past more than 1 year must be launched through the submission of an expression of interest on a platform called ARIMA, which works fundamentally in a way that's similar to Express Entry. Again, you have point requirements. This is how the different points are weighted. So you see there's a lot of points in there for training, and some for experience. Age is very important. Language ability, very important. And then if the person is applying as part of a couple, their accompanying spouse's abilities has something to do with the decision. Again, there's potentially a lot of points available for a validated job offer. Just so you know, Quebec validation is quite similar to federal validation, and also interestingly and totally different from the federal program, because Quebec is overtly interested in demographics. There are points for children, and the younger they are, the more points you get. So Charles has asked me if the accompanying common law partner student, does that get counted? No, it does not, because they're not an applicant. They're not applying for anything because they're already Canadian. But if you have a Canadian partner, so they're not accompanying because they're already here in terms of the immigration status or citizenship status. But they definitely could sponsor their common law spouse, which is another way to become a permanent resident. And in some situations, that might be the better option. So where do these points, or how many points do you get, just to give you a feel for, we'll get to age in just a second. So the minimum is, and this is a minimum requirement, you can't apply unless you have the equivalent. Oh, Jenny, I'm going to come back to your point. That's a really important point, but we're going to come back to it. So you need to have the equivalent of a Canadian or a Quebec secondary education. That's grade 11 in Quebec, not grade 12, as it is in the rest of Canada. That would get you, secondary education gets you 2 points, and the maximum points available for education level is 14 points. Then we have a second assessment for what they call the area of training. So theoretically, the government of Quebec has gone through all the different kinds of training at all the different levels and assessed how much demand there is for people with that training in the labor force, and there is a maximum of 12 points for the principal applicant. And if you're if you're part of a couple, a maximum of 4 points for your spouse or common law partner. So let me before we get into that, let me answer Jenny's important question. She asked a question about, is a Canadian boyfriend also count, not a Canadian husband? Okay. So in immigration terms, there's no such thing really as a boyfriend. What we are concerned about is common law partners. So what's a common law partner? Common law partner is someone you're not married to, but with whom you're in a conjugal or marriage-like relationship, meaning there's normally some sort of personal intimacy, there is sharing of the expenses and burdens of life, and there's some sort of commitment to that relationship going forward. So if you have to have lived together continuously in that kind of relationship for at least 12 months. Now, at the point in which you are considered in a common law relationship, that has to be, it's not optional. It must be reported to immigration authorities, whether it's Quebec or Canada, in your application. Not to do so is a misrepresentation. And where we see problems are where, because immigration processing times can be quite lengthy, you might start an application having lived with someone for 9 months and then cross that 12-month threshold before the end of the processing. You are expected to report that. Now, in the case where the common law partner is a Canadian citizen, that doesn't make your life very complicated because that person has all the status they could ever hope to have in Canada already. But where that person is another foreign national, that can have really important consequences. That person may have to undergo medical examination, submit police certificates, even if they're not part of the application. So I'm not going to go through all of the details of that, but it is important to have in your mind that a person who has a common law partner must report that. You don't have to include them in the application, but they must report them as such in all of their applications. And they must update their application if in the course of the processing of the application, they go from not having a common law partner to having a common law partner. The same obviously applies to getting married. So just to show you, okay, let's come back to area of training. This is the points for education for the government of Quebec. So as we mentioned, that there are lists, there are actually tables for these. And we just wanted to give you an example. So somebody who has a university level degree in accounting and accounting science, a bachelor degree, if they did that degree in Quebec and they're the principal applicant, they get 12 points. But the same degree from outside of Canada only gets 9 points. And you see there's a part circled that shows how many points for each type of education. You can see there are lists. So you've got to find each type of education on the list, see how many points it gets. And remember that you have to look at whether the degree or diploma was issued in Canada or from outside Canada, and just outside Quebec, actually. But you should know that this actually says degree from Quebec, but they actually mean from Canada, because any institution in Canada will get Quebec points. So how do you know, especially if you have an education from outside Canada, what your area of studies is? Well, the best way to find the answer to that question is to give the me fee, to make an application for a comparative evaluation, send them $126, send them your diploma and your transcript, and they will send you back within a couple months, usually, an answer to that question. And that is an answer you can usually bank on. I see I've got a couple questions to catch up on. Okay. So Oslavia has a new question. How about degrees for outside of Quebec but inside Canada? Okay, that's what I was saying, Oslavia. A Canadian degree for the purpose of area of training is a Quebec degree. This is the one case I can think of where Quebec includes the rest of Canada. So another important criteria is work experience. The points, you start to collect points on the Quebec assessment when you have more than 6 months. It's sort of broken up into intervals of, well, various intervals, but the maximum points is 8 points, which you get at 48 months or more of work experience in Quebec. And this is, in this case, it's really in Quebec, not in Canada. So for the degrees, it's anywhere in Canada. For the work experience, it's really in Quebec. By the way, this has become, and I don't know anyone who necessarily knows all the answers. This has become a lot more complicated in the last couple of years because of people working remotely in Quebec for employers outside of Canada. I cannot tell you definitively today that somebody who is working in their home in Quebec remotely for an employer outside Quebec will be considered to have in Quebec experience. In fact, my suspicion is that they will not. But that is definitely something to think about when you are thinking about a Quebec application and work experience. Charles says, Charles, you're hitting my topic of the year this year. Do self-employed individuals get treated differently? Charles, I love the question. Let me tell you why. I'm going to try and give you the short answer. I'm in the process of going through this with the Quebec government, because let me tell you why. If you look at their website, their application forms, it says you cannot use experience that you acquired as work experience for Quebec in the Quebec Experience program. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about in the regular program. In the regular program, you actually can use self-employed experience. Actually, you know what? Let's wait until we talk about the Quebec Experience program to get there. So the answer I'm going to give you is yes, if you are applying as in the regular program. No, if you're applying in the PEC, at least no insofar as the Quebec government is concerned. And I'm going to tell you why the Quebec government's wrong when we get there. So again, for language points, big surprise here, we're talking Quebec. So actually, in this case, for the Quebec regular skilled worker program, they look at all four abilities: read, write, speak, understand. For the principal applicant, for the spouse, they're only looking at speaking and listening, and only in French. For the main applicant, there are points available for both English and French, but a lot more points because we are in Quebec for French, maximum 16, than for English, maximum 6. Now, there are points, there's a series of points for sort of integration, which for having stayed in Quebec, there's a maximum of 5 points. Now you can get those 5 points if you've studied here for 3 months or more. So pretty much everybody who's been through university or college here gets those. Or if you have a close family member here who's a spouse, grandparent, sibling, children, grandchildren, first degree blood relation. Ooh, characteristics. Sorry, I'm going to have to correct that slide. My apologies. Of the accompanying spouse. So remembering again that we have different points. We have points available for a spouse. So again, if you're single, you're not being penalized for being single because the points that you earn or don't earn are assessed differently depending on whether you're applying with another applicant in terms of the point requirements, not the points so much themselves, but the point requirements that you need to make. So there's a mini evaluation of your spouse or common law partner, maximum of 4 points for the level of education, another maximum of 4 points for the area of education, 3 points for age, and language proficiency, there's a maximum of 6 points. But that's French only. Also, another requirement is that you have to sign a document, which is kind of a promise, that you will support yourself once you become a permanent resident the first 3 months after you land in Quebec. And you have to say that you would have available to you, if you're a single individual, about $3,400, or for a family of 2 and a child, about $5,500. There's a table that shows the different amounts for these, but they don't actually ask you to show any proof of that. It's basically the way it actually works is during those first 3 months, you better not apply for welfare, because if you do, the government will come back and ask you to repay them whatever money you received during that period. So remembering that this is a point system, it's a point system which goes through 2 steps. The first step is called preliminary processing, and there's a point minimum there. For single applicant, 43 points. For an applicant with a spouse, 9 more points. And it's the same point spread at the final selection spread, 50 to 59. Let's look at how that works out in practice. I'm sorry, I don't know how much you can see. I hope you all are looking at this on big screens. But this is a little case that we ran. So what we're looking at And here you can see the points, right? Someone was asking me for age, how many points? Well, you see the breakdown here. You see that from, I'm sorry, I'm looking to my right because I have a bigger screen there. You get the maximum points in Quebec from 18 to 35 years of age, not 30 like in the federal system. Then you lose 2 points per year when you're 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, until finally, by the time you're 43, you have no more points. And again, you can see the breakdown for experience. You can if you want to come back and look at this again, I think the slide will be available. It shows you how the points break down. But let's run a concrete example. Somebody comes in and they're interested in the Quebec Skilled Worker Program. They have recently completed a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. They have 6 months experience as a skilled worker. They're in that, they're in that golden age bracket of 18 to 35 years old. They have some ability in English, maybe not so much in French. They were a student in Quebec for more than 6 months, no family here. They're married. Their spouse has a bachelor's degree of 3 years. It's in a subject matter that gets no extra points for the area of training. They're again in a similar age bracket, 18 to 35 years old, and they don't speak French, and they don't have a validated job offer. They don't have children, and they're okay for financial self-sufficiency. They've got the $4,000 or $5,000 necessary to make that declaration. So let's see. Let's see the points. So for a single, we'll do it as a single applicant. You're getting a lot of points. The bachelor's degree gets you only 10 points out of 14, but your area of training with computer engineering is getting you the max of 12 points. And you're getting the minimum 4 points for your 6 months experience as a skilled worker, maximum points for your age, no points for French in our thing. And English, here we were saying not perfect, but pretty good. So 4 points out of 6. That has studied in Quebec, so 5 points. No spouse, we're in this hypothesis. So at the preliminary assessment, which only takes the factors that are above that line into account, the requirement is 43. This applicant gets 51. They have no children, so no points there. They get that 1 extra point everyone basically gets once they have financial self-sufficiency. So this person is passing. The requirement is 50 points. They are at 52. But let's look at what happens if they are applying with the spouse that we mentioned instead of alone. So now what has happened is they are getting, their spouse is getting 6 points only, 3 for the bachelor's degree and 3 for their age, none for their area of training, none for language. So because the requirements, as I mentioned earlier, increase by 9 points everywhere if you're coming as part of a couple. And so this person is okay at the preliminary processing stage, but no longer okay at selection. They're 1 point short. So that might be a situation where you want to look at applying alone. So I see a question from Dani, which is Quebec uses a score system now. Dani, they always have. This is nothing new. You are probably more used to hearing about the Quebec Experience Program, which, like the Canadian Experience Program, does not have a point requirement. But Quebec has always had a point system. So to go from Quebec's pool into a position where you can get qualify as a skilled worker, you have to have that minimum number of points. So what's happening now? How do you apply under the regular Quebec Skilled Worker Program? You have to create that expression of interest in ARIMA. You have to be careful when you do that you're giving, oh my God, truthful, again, another type. I've got to figure out accurate information. Because anything that you put in there, you will be asked to demonstrate proof of later. And once you have been invited to apply, you must complete your application within 60 days. So it's important to look at the documents that are going to be needed down the road to make sure that you either have everything you are going to need, like language test results, because when you're doing the expression of interest, they're not asking for any documents. Certified copies of diplomas and transcripts, former employment. And actually, to be honest, one of the things with Quebec and the federal government you have to be careful of. Some people, for example, who have foreign work experience have difficulty getting evidence of that. Let's say you worked a few years ago for a company in another country, and that company went under or is under different management, and you just can't get any documents to show that work experience. So you are better not to declare that work experience than to be in a situation where you've declared it and you now have to prove it. Charles asks, will somebody be asked to prove that they are single and not living in a common law relationship? No, they will not. But there are serious consequences for someone who was in a common law relationship and didn't declare it. And I won't go into all the details, but that could happen at various different times along the road. In fact, even after they become a citizen, that could be a problem. So do it. Just take my word for it. Just do it. Okay. So if you have created your expression of interest, you may receive an invitation in your ARIMA account. And in the we're still more or less in early days with the ARIMA being used in the skilled worker program and these invitations. So it's been very hard to predict who is going to get an invitation because the law gives the province a tremendous amount of discretion as to who to invite. So what we have seen, the major criteria that we have seen being used to establish who is going to get an invitation is having a validated job offer, but more often, and especially recently, having a validated job offer outside of the Montreal metropolitan area. And if you look at a Quebec electoral map, you will note that the party in power has almost no elected representatives here on the island of Montreal, but lots outside of it. So not a big surprise that they are making those people happy. And also they are sending some invitations out to people having experience in an occupation and declaring that they want to work in that occupation where that occupation is in high demand and having a certain high ranking score, or sometimes just having a high ranking score. And again, the government of Quebec has a handy dandy ranking score calculator. I'm just going to point out it is in French only. So let me just come back to, I'm sorry, maybe I'm going to wait till the end, but there are a lot of questions about common law partners. So, okay, so I'm going to come back to what is a common law partner, and this is defined on the IRCC website. So a common law relationship is two people, yes, that must have lived together for 12 months continuously in a marriage-like relationship. So Slavia asks, what are the requirements for a married spouse to be recognized as part of an application? You must have contracted a legal marriage, and that's it. They can be included in the application. Whether that's good or bad for the application depends on some of the things we were talking about earlier. And Charles had, so the best course of action is for a common law spouse to sponsor the person that's immigrating. Is that different from the PEC? So it may or may not be the best course. It's usually a pretty good application where the common law relationship is solid and easy to document. Is that different from the PEC? It's totally different from the PEC because the person is getting permanent residence on the basis of being sponsored by their common law partner, not on the basis of their work experience or studies in Quebec and their abilities in the French language. Now Jenny is asking for how to prove they have a common law relationship. Lots of ways, but that's really outside the scope of what we're doing today. Sorry, Jenny, but you know, maybe you can ask Walter if we can do another session on that. But that is there are lots of ways to do it. Let's just say there are lots of ways to do it. And the one you mentioned, having both people on the lease, that's certainly one of the good ones. So let's move on, and we're talking about what's going on with the regular skilled worker program. So again, I mentioned to show that you are financially able to support yourself, you just have to sign a document. Now, here's some interesting, well, I find interesting stuff. Until now, the ARIMA has made very few invitations to apply as a skilled worker. The total number as of January 2022, since the program was started in 2019, is less than 7,000 invitations. Also interesting is the fact that the majority in 2019 and 2020 of these applications, and this has to do with who was invited, were sent to people who were already in Quebec. We see that that changed outside Quebec. That's probably in 2021 rather. That's probably the byproduct of them making some invitations to people on the basis of their occupation. So this is people whose occupations like teachers and doctors and things like that are in high demand. They got invitations, not huge numbers though. In the big scheme of things, these are very small numbers. And even given those small numbers, not everybody who is invited makes an application. According to my, my napkin corner of a napkin calculations, only about 3/4 of the people who were invited actually followed through with an invitation. As I mentioned, to get an invitation, one of the important factors is having a validated job offer. So if you look at this table on this slide, you will see that there's been a big change. If you look, like for example, in 2014, which is before ARIMA, and people just applying on a point system into the program, you will see that only 1% roughly of applicants had a validated job offer. That's avec OEV. That's the column there, the middle column. But if we flash forward to 2020, that we go from 1% having to 75% roughly of those people having a validated job offer. And that's because those are the people who are getting invitations. So what, again, I want to put this in perspective. These are pretty small numbers overall. Oh, one of the countries, just an interesting little tidbit. The top source countries for people who have been invited to apply in ARIMA from 2019 until January 2022 shows that a high percentage of those applicants, almost a quarter, were from Algeria alone. And no other country even came close. After that, all the other countries are Francophone countries, all except France, Francophone countries in Africa. And the only interloper in there is India, interestingly enough, which has about 1 in 8. Probably applications being made on the basis of occupation. So this is again some examples of who has been invited to apply. This was last year in 2021. So in the different rounds, you started to see just in January was validated job offer, and then in August it started to get a little more complicated. So we started to ask for people with a ranking score of 591 at least, and occupation in web development. And the next one, a week later, score of at least 548 and occupation in web development or IT. And there were 17 occupations actually that fell under that sort of general description. A similar one after that in August. Then in September, we see, for example, occupations in nursing or non-post-secondary teaching, and then we start to see validated job offers outside Montreal, and then that's been recurring until now. Lots of invitations to people who have a validated job offer outside of Montreal. This year, it's been weird. We've seen invitations to people in occupations in high demand, IT, healthcare, education again. And then also some invitations for the first time sent out strictly on the basis of very high ranking scores of over 600 points. And should be borne in mind that a validated job offer in Montreal gives another 180 points, which is a lot. So Amin has a question and is going to leave. He's threatening to leave. So I'm not the one. I mean, I'm not the one who can tell you, but I'm sure the CSU legal clinic folks. Probably you should send them your email address, tell them you're interested in the slides. I'm not so sure about the recording that may go up on a Facebook page or a website somewhere. They'll be able to tell you, but thank you, Amin. Thank you for participating until now. CSU Legal confirms the recording will be shared. So again, we saw that increasingly now as we move forward, those ranking scores for Quebec are important. So, and I believe that this is going to potentially become, for some people who are not Francophone, the best option. Not everybody, but some people. So there are 80 ranking points available for fluency in English, and there's 110 points for age 18 to 30. There's some there's points for working experience up to 100. Somebody who has a master's degree or any kind of postgraduate university diploma, 90 points. 3 years of experience in an occupation where there's a shortage, 100 points. An area of training, again, this is based on demand in the workforce, 60 points. Master's degree from Quebec, 50 points. Professional experience in Quebec, 100 points. So somebody who's been here, let's say, did a master's degree and worked in a highly skilled position in an occupation that's in high demand for a few years, even if they don't speak French, may be in a pretty good position to qualify, whereas the Quebec Experience Program, which does require a pretty good level of fluency, is not an option. And let's talk a little bit. We also saw that validations are super important potentially in Quebec. So a validation is not such a bad thing in Quebec. It's not so hard to get for a lot of people, especially university graduates. So the company, the applicant for a validation is not the foreign worker, it's their employer. So the employer has to have been in business in Quebec for at least 12 months. They have to show that they've made reasonable efforts to recruit locally. There are no, unlike the federal side, which has very, very precise requirements about how you show you have recruited properly, Quebec sort of leaves it open. And they also have a very, very important carve out, which is that you don't have to show attempts to recruit locally if the person for whom they are asking the validation is already in the job, which is generally going to be the case for somebody who's working under a postgraduate work permit. So that, which is often the most annoying part for the employer of the validation process, is out of it entirely. They have to show that a local employee could not be trained within a year. Again, this doesn't apply if the person's already in the job. The job offer has to be at least 30 hours a week. It has to be a full-time offer. The salary has to be at least at the amount that, according to Quebec's labor market studies, is the one ordinarily paid for that occupation, for that level of experience. And I've given the link where you can see what that, how to calculate that. Again, this works on the basis of the NOC. The employer has to pay a fee of $210, and there is an explicit statement that here it can't be a job. You can't validate a job which would essentially make you self-employed. You can't exercise any control, ownership interest to have control of that business. So your takeaways, I hope, are this is actually a pretty easy process, not expensive. The processing times for the Quebec skilled worker and the PEC are the same. And we have seen in practice, we have seen pretty fast processing times for the Quebec skilled worker program. The skilled worker program, on the other hand, definitely requires a lot more documents than the PEC, but it can be an attractive option, and maybe the only option for somebody who meets the point requirements and minimum requirements, and could be a faster way to a Quebec skilled worker for both Anglophone and Francophone applicants, because, as we're going to see in just a minute, you may be able to qualify before you have met the work experience requirements that would apply if you're applying in the Quebec Experience Program. So actually, now I'm ready to move on to the Quebec Experience Program. Any questions about the regular Quebec Skilled Worker Program before we go there? Looks like no. All right, on we go. So the Quebec Experience Program, or the PEC, is intended to provide selection certificates for people who have already put themselves in a good position to succeed in the labor market by having a solid command of oral French and either fairly lengthy studies at either the post-secondary or professional secondary level in Quebec, and now, well, or in some cases and in other cases, and at least 1 year of full-time work in a skilled or semi-skilled occupation. And in some cases, 2 years of work experience. It gets complicated, I'll explain. Because we have transitory rules so it's important to understand where an individual falls within those transitory rules to know which rules apply to them. So since the beginning of last year, all new PEC applications have to be submitted online through the ARIMA platform. And actually, maybe uncharacteristically, maybe I'm being uncharitable here, but I would say uncharacteristically, MIFI has created a series of helpful tutorials, although they are available in French only, on how to submit a PEC application. But given that French knowledge is a prerequisite of the program, it's maybe not unfair that those materials are all in French. So what are the advantages? Why would a person prefer the Quebec Experience program to the regular program? Well, certainty, because you get to decide when you apply, and if you apply, if you meet the requirements, you can apply. You don't have to wait for an invitation. You don't have to hope that you meet the criteria for a future invitation. So you control the timing of the application. And the documents that are required are pretty straightforward and pretty easy to put together. And once you have your Quebec selection certificate, it's pretty easy to keep your work permit going once your postgraduate permit expires. Sorry, so Tamar maybe is correcting an earlier question. Let me just see. Somebody whose country of origin has to submit. Tamar, I'm sorry to say this again. Everybody has to submit language test results to show language. Everybody. It's very democratic that way. Everybody is on the same footing, no matter what language they were educated in, where they grew up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's just universal. I know it's frustrating for people who consider that they have fluency in a language, but it is what it is, man. It is what it is. So who qualifies for the PEC? And this is where I'm going to get into something that interests me. So there are 8 requirements for foreign workers. So you have to have the intention of settling in Quebec to hold a job. So that's what we were talking about intent before. That's important. You have to have lived in Quebec with the primary goal of working. I hate this formulation, but it is what it is. And I said here, I keep forgetting to correct this slide. I said that accompanying spouses cannot apply under the PEC. Yes, they can. That was changed, and it was a good change. And they have to have respected the conditions of their stay, which means that when they were working, they have to have had the right authorization to work. So that means they have to be legal in Quebec as temporary foreign worker or under a youth exchange program like the Working Holidays program. And they have to have had a full-time job in one of those NOC level 0, A, or B positions for at least 24 months in the 36 months preceding the submission of the application. But if they were working in Quebec, they had a work permit in Quebec before July 20th, 2020, then they're grandfathered, and the requirement is not 24 months of highly skilled work in 36. It's 12 months of full-time work experience within 24 months, but any work experience. Complicated enough? Oh, I have a question. Maybe it is complicated enough. Slavia asks a question, says she graduated in 2019. Okay, so Slavia, I'm going to ask you a fast question because you're not going to find easy answers to your situation, but I'm going to answer the question because other people might run into this situation. So Slavia, I'm going to assume in answering this question that you, after graduation in 2019, applied for a postgraduate work permit. And that means that you had a work permit for Quebec that allowed you to work in Quebec anyway, that was valid on July 20th, 2021, 21st, 2021. That means you are grandfathered. So you could apply if you have worked in a skilled position for 12 months in the past 24 before your application, in any position. You could have been a barista or you could have been a cashier, any job, as long as it was full-time and it was in Quebec, you qualify. If, on the other hand, let's say hypothetically, you got your work permit later than that, after July 21st, starting on July 21st, 2021 or later, then you would be subject to the new rules, which means level O, A, or B NOC positions only, and you need 2 years work experience, not 1. So Yanni asks, Okay. Daniel, that's not really, okay, she's asking whether you need a valid passport to extend your work, your postgraduate work permit. Yes, you always need a valid passport unless you're American. That's the small exception to extend your work permit. So that's across the board, whatever program you're applying to. So, sorry, let's go back to our list of the 8 requirements to apply in the PEC. We were at number 4. Number 5 is at the time you view your application, you have to have a full-time job in one of those skilled positions. So you might have been out of work for a little while, and in COVID, this was more of an issue, and there was even some sort of accommodation for some people, but you must have that job at the time you make the application. And you must, and we'll talk about how you do this, demonstrate advanced intermediate knowledge of French, and you must undertake to provide for your needs, sign that contract that you're not going to take welfare for 3 months, and you have to be at least 18 years old and hold a valid passport. So again, to come back to Jenny's question, no valid passport, no application for the PEC, but most people that won't be a problem for. But let me come back to point 4. Now, if you look at the website and the application form for the PEC, it will tell you that you cannot use experience you got as a self-employed person. That means working in a business in which you hold any sort of ownership interest to qualify under the PEC. Now, they say that on the form, they say that on the website, and they sincerely believe it, and they actually make decisions acting like it's true. Here's the news flash. It's not true. It's not in the law anywhere. And I am in the midst of challenging this with a client. And what's most interesting is that in the course of preparing the challenge to the decision for that client, I found out that there were 10 days in November 2019 when it was true. They did put something into the regulation for that short period of time. And then they put it in and then they took it out. So that means 2 things. That means that they know that applicants who are self-employed are not banned from the PEC under the current law. And second thing, it means since some date in November 2019, they haven't been banned. So my advice is, and I have another case we're about to try it again, is somebody who is self-employed, come see me, because I think we have a case. All the government of Quebec has to do, to be honest, is fix their dumb law, which they're entirely capable of doing fairly fast to fix the regulation. I have no idea why they haven't put that section back in and why they insist on acting like it is part of the law when it's not. But, you know, I can't answer all these questions for the government of Quebec. So again, here's the temporary foreign worker thing. So here's the Quebec International Student Program, and you will see that it's very similar. One requirement is that you have to have been here with the intention of studying and respected the conditions of your stay. And that's actually, I'm not going to get into all the details, but it's actually much more complicated than it looks like. So it means that you must have, for example, had the required medical insurance for international students while you were studying. You must have had the right CAQ for the studies you were doing if you changed the kind of studies you were doing. It also means, and the regulation mentions this specifically, is you must not have had a scholarship that had as a condition that you return to your country of origin after you complete your studies. You have to have the intention of settling in Quebec to hold a job, which means that you cannot apply saying that, well, now I'm going to go on, I did a bachelor's, now I'm going to do a master's. You will be shooting yourself in the foot if you do that, and you can't actually apply for a CAQ for those studies while this application is in process. That is before you become a permanent resident. After a permanent resident, you're okay. And also you have to have physically lived in Quebec for at least half of the duration of your study program. And in the past, we worried about off-campus programs or people who transferred into Quebec from another program outside the province. Now we worry about people studying remotely during COVID. So this is something you need to be a little bit alive to. And you also have to have an eligible diploma for Concordia graduates who studied at the bachelor or master's or PhD level. This is absolutely not a problem. But there are some shorter diplomas. You need to know that the duration of the program has to have been at least 1,800 hours of study for certain professional programs. And also you, in addition to having completed those studies, you have to have worked in a skilled, a level 0A or B NOC position for at least 12 months. Or if you did a technical deck, again, this is not going to come up for you guys very often. You have to have worked 18 months and in a job that is related to the kind of studies you were doing when you were doing your technical studies. Again, you have the requirement to sort of contract not to take welfare for your first 3 months. You have to be 18 years of age, and legally residing in Quebec at the time of submission of your application. So this is actually an important distinction with the worker program. The worker program, you have to be working in the province in an appropriate skill level position. For this program, you just have to be here legally. You could be even here as a visitor. If you're in Quebec, you don't have to be in Quebec. So somebody's having problems staying in status. Let's say it's taken them a little while to get their French result that they need, and they had to leave the country. You can apply in this PEC program while outside of the country or not having a work permit, whereas that's not possible in the other program. Let's talk about how one shows that they have the required level of French. So you can either have studied in French in Quebec, in one of the program you're using to qualify for the PEC. You can also, and this is the most common way to do it, have the result of a standardized French test showing that you are at least advanced intermediate. You could also, before that, if you were here a while ago, you might be able to use a French course, though for reasons I won't go into too much. That's not a good idea right now. You can show that you met the linguistic requirements to be a member of a professional order, such as the Bachelor Quebec, called the médecin, the engineering or nursing professional orders, anything like that. That you have done at least 3 years of full-time studies in French at the secondary or post-secondary level. So this really means all in French. You can't just be French and something else, it's all in French. And you could, right, I mentioned that for some people you can do a French course. That's a bad idea these days for reasons I'm going to explain. There's also a new requirement that kicked in July last year, which is that the spouse or common law partner of the principal applicant who is in the application, they have to be applying together, has to show level 4 ability in oral French. So level 4 is a low intermediate ability. It's advanced beginner. It's advanced beginner. So it's less demanding, considerably less demanding, but it's not nothing. Now, who does this apply to? Not everybody. Somebody who had a valid work permit on July 20th, 2020 and is applying as a worker, or who completed a program of study by or before December 31st, 2020 and is applying in the student wing, is grandfathered in and does not have to meet this requirement. You do not have to include your spouse or common law partner in your PEC application or in the application for permanent residence. So in the case where the person's spouse or common law partner can't meet this requirement, that might be something to think about. And after the principal applicant becomes a permanent resident, as in the PEC or the regular skilled worker program, they can sponsor the spouse without meeting a French requirement. However, what we have been seeing is that IRCC, this is when you get to the permanent residence phase, you've already got the selection certificate, has been demanding that people who apply without their spouse or common law partner explain why they're doing this. And if they find that the person really has the intention to become a permanent resident, they threaten to find that the person has misrepresented. And that has serious consequences. So that anytime you hear about misrepresentation, because that's another 2-hour topic, you need to take that seriously. So if somebody shows that they meet the French requirement through having passed a French course, they have been getting called in to an examination in person. And if their level is found to be 7 or better, advanced intermediate, that's fine. They get their CSQ. If not, they are either refused or in some cases rejected. And if you are rejected, if you're considered to be too far underneath the level that you said that you had, you may be banned from making a new application with Quebec for 5 years. Now, we were involved in challenging the right of the government of Quebec to do these interviews to assess French, and we were successful in at the Quebec Board of Appeal in a case called Do, but in 2018, the regulation was changed. So without giving you all the details, I want to say that we do not feel at all confident that we could successfully challenge the right of the government of Quebec to hold these French tests now. The other thing to know, if, for example, you're counseling students who have been called into one of these interviews, is they're doing something really awful. So what they do is they ask the person at the beginning of their interview, well, do you speak and understand advanced intermediate French? And if they say yes, and they later test at a lower level, they are accused of making a misrepresentation. So I am regularly contacted by people who have these interviews coming, and I will tell you what I tell them, which is when they ask you what your level is, you say, I thought that that was what we were here today to do. So I'm not an expert in that. I'll let you decide. Or words to that effect. Because what we had is in the past, initially, the only people who were getting called to interviews were those who had taken courses. Now we're seeing people getting called in who had standardized French test results. And to add to the beauty, last summer, MIFI started calling in people for assessment interviews who had had CSQs since 2018. And they were being threatened that those CSQs would be canceled if they could not show at an interview that they had advanced intermediate French. These people all had very well advanced permanent residence applications and normally should have become permanent residents by then, but the MIFI had actually asked that their files be put on hold so they could be assessed. Now, the weird thing in Quebec law is the MIFI actually does have the authority to check that somebody meets the requirement of their CSQ right until the date they become a permanent resident. However, some of these people, especially in case we're talking about 2018, may have had their applications processed under the old regulation, where that's not the case, where these interviews would be illegitimate. So there's that, but I don't think we'll see any more of these. And the number of people, from what we could tell, who were called in for these interviews was pretty small. And I haven't heard about anyone who actually had their CSQ canceled, although I did hear about one person who was told they had not met the level that was required, but that they were going to use discretion and allow them to keep their CSQ because they had economically integrated by starting a business in Quebec. So they do have some discretion on whether or not to go ahead with the procedure to cancel a CSQ. Another new requirement which came in 2020 was the requirement that every applicant pass something called a test on democratic values. This was strictly, I don't think I'm being cynical in saying this, this was strictly an electoral exercise in 2019, the promise that they made that they felt compelled to carry out because nobody fails this dumb test. It's not really something to worry about. It's a small number of questions. You have lots of time to answer it. It's open book. Only out of about 1,500 people in 2020, up to 2020, who had taken the test, only 51 had passed, and all those people also failed, rather, and all those people passed on a retest. So just some quick exercises to remind you of some of the important points. So Anne is graduating from a 1,400-hour secondary school diploma course. Can she apply for a CSQ under the PEC? Why or why not? Any thoughts? Well, okay, I'll let you think. I don't know. We're not in a format right now. We usually do this live, but here. So the answer to that question is no, she cannot, because the requirement is for an 1,800-hour course of study, and this is a secondary school diploma. It doesn't say it's secondary professional, so those are two reasons. So you have to be conscious of what the program of study is that the person is doing. So second question is Bertrand is about to graduate with a bachelor's degree and he would like to do a master's degree next. He wants to apply for a CSQ, and once he has this, he wants to apply for a new CAQ and study permit so that he can complete his program before he becomes a permanent resident. Can he do it? I think we already covered this, but the answer is no. Because he has the intention to start new studies, you have to have the intention if you apply in the PEC to join the workforce, at least until you're a permanent resident. Third exercise, Charlotte is 25, graduated 30 months ago from a bachelor's degree in French at the Université de Montréal. She had a CAQ and study permit during her studies and lived in Quebec the entire time. Part of her program was English language classes. She has since held a postgraduate work permit and held a job at level B of the NOC for 12 months. She decided that she wants to stay in Quebec. What can she do? And we suggest she can apply under the PEC as a diplômée du Québec, because she's got the required bachelor. She's got the required education in the form of a bachelor's degree, and she has 12 months of work experience in a level B position. So an important consideration when we are looking at choices in life, somebody who may not have strong feelings about staying in Quebec or not staying in Quebec, and who wants to think about, but who has strong feelings about becoming, when they become a permanent resident, for whom sooner is important, sooner rather than later is very important. So an important benefit on the federal side is that applications under express entry have been traditionally generally processed within 6 months of submission. And Quebec has promised to process their economic applications within 6 months as well. But after that, you then have to make that second application, which has to be submitted to IRCC. So IRCC has been showing a processing time of 27 months, but a better 15 to 17 month processing time going forward. That's better, but still much longer than express entry. You've got at least a year more than if you are applying an express entry. So actually, and I didn't mention this here, but another consideration for some people may be cost, because when you're applying to Quebec, you are also assuming the extra cost that goes along with that, which is, for a single person about $900, which you don't have to pay to the federal government. So it's less money, less time. But if you have to move or something, that's money and time as well. And a lot of people like it here, amazingly. So if the person is genuinely attached to living in Quebec, then they have to qualify in a Quebec program, and that's what they should do. So again, here are some what I hope are useful links for the Quebec programs. The point grid that I showed you for the regular skilled worker program, the lists for the areas of training, general notes, and also you had also earlier in another spot their sort of assessment tool. So that takes me to the end of my presentation. Do we have? Oh, we have new messages. Sorry, I hadn't been following the chat. We have new messages. So Charles asked, "Do you need a language test if you already have a bachelor's degree?" Charles, you guys are killing me with these language tests. You always need language tests. Yes, always. Oh, but in the PEC, sorry, the exception here, yes. If you have studied in French, then you have studied in France, but in French, you don't need to show it. Now, for points in English, if you're talking about English, now we're talking about English has no place in the Quebec Experience Program. So I assume we're talking about the regular skilled worker program, Quebec skilled worker program, and you must in the Quebec skilled worker program, all points for language are flow from submitting a test result. So Aslavia says, I'm not sure if I understand Osavia's point, something about a work permit. Time I completed my master's in Quebec, the work permit had already expired. Not sure, this maybe Osavia explains lower. I believe the pre-2020 program allowed to apply outside of Quebec. Was that the case? Apply for what outside Quebec? I'm sorry, Aslavi, I don't get, maybe you can clarify the question. Tamar asks, if my program was taught in English, but I took at least one course taught in French, could I demonstrate my proficiency with French? No. So, and when they say a course in French, so for the PEC, really everything has to be in French. For example, a person, let's say, who's doing a master's degree and has a thesis must submit a copy of their thesis to show that the thesis was in French. And if their thesis wasn't in French, then they need to do that French test. I've actually had that situation come up. Somebody who did a doctoral program, but had not, and had done some coursework in English. They had gone to study in another university. I don't remember if it was McGill or Concordia for some courses. And because of that, nope, you didn't study all in French. You did some coursework in English. You need to do a French test. So when in doubt, do the French test, unfortunately. Slavia, maybe I can hang in. You can maybe clarify the earlier questions. Okay, I meant to apply CSQ and permanent residence under the pre-20 rules. Can I apply from outside Canada? So you can apply for the CSQ in the PEC from outside Canada if you're applying as a student. That means that you have both completed your studies and 1 year of qualifying work experience and the French test result. And you can apply from outside Canada or from inside Canada as something other than a worker or not being employed at that time. Hope that, Slavia, I hope that answers your question. Any more questions? I think I'm down at the bottom of my scroll. So we may have hit the end of our presentation. Oh. So postgraduate work permit expired after I left my bachelor. So after I finished my master's. Okay, so a postgraduate work permit is a once in a lifetime thing. So you will not get a second postgraduate work permit. So I'm not sure unless you worked for a year in between the degrees. Okay, Slavia, get on there, jump on. I think that would be easier, I agree.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi, David. So my question is, basically, I went to a school in Vancouver for my bachelor's. I got my postgraduate work permit. It ran out, and then it ran out while I was doing my master's in Quebec. So it was a very bad timing decision. Anyhow, I know I cannot get another one because that's the whole point of the postgraduate work permit, because it's a one-time thing. And now, but I graduated before the changes came into effect. So I graduated in October 2019. So my question is, if I graduate,
sorry, from in Vancouver or here doing your master's?
Concordia, yeah, in Quebec. I did my master's.
Now you're here with what status?
I'm not there. That's the thing.
You're not here. Okay.
I'm assuming from Mexico, basically.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize that I was quite this international. Okay.
Yeah, well.
So you finished your master's, went back to Mexico.
Pretty much, because at that point I didn't have any postgraduate work permit I could use to stay. So
Slavia, the challenge for you is you don't have 12 months, I think, or Quebec work experience.
But that's the thing. I believe that, and this is what I'm trying
but
to
you
find out.
you completed before December 30th.
Yes, so that wouldn't apply to me nor to my spouse.
Right.
So I want to know where can I find those rules, because since I'll be applying under those rules, I kind of like.
So you should be grandfathered. You should be grandfathered to apply under the old program, which didn't require work, right?
Yeah.
As long as you've got the French test result.
Yes, and that's the only thing I'm waiting for. I couldn't do it through the pandemic because.
All right, so you're still within your 3 years, so you should be okay for a little while.
So, but my question is, would you know where I can find a link to those rules so that when I make my application,
I don't know if you would find them. That would be the transitory rules in the Quebec immigration regulation.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll play
So
on the
they're
list. Thank you.
if you're looking at those, they're near the end.
Transitory rules.
The transitory rules, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Transitory rules are rules how to describe how we go from one set of rules to the next.
Okay, I'll look
So
for
I
those.
have a question, CSU folks. We're being asked where the recording can be accessed, and I don't know. So maybe you can, you put it in the text, I'll read it, or if you can jump in and tell people, maybe that would be great.
So I believe that the recording will be accessible through the CSU social media pages, but if anyone, like it'll take a day or two to get it ready and posted, but if anyone doesn't see it posted after those 2 days and wants access to it, feel free to just shoot us an email and we'll send it to you.
So I have a question from Charles, so the question is still coming in. Does the PEC give extra points if there's a Canadian common law partner? So the PEC is not a point-based assessment. So the answer is no. But if we're asking about the regular skilled worker program, let's remember that there is a 9-point spread between the requirement for a single versus applicant versus an applicant who's part of a couple. And depending on the attributes, so you get some points for having a family member or having a common law partner. But let me quick talk about the advantages maybe of a sponsorship, because that is actually something that does come up often. And so some people don't have, let's say they don't have the French, they don't qualify as a Quebec skilled worker, but they want to stay here. And they are in a common law relationship with somebody who's a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Well, yes, in that case, sponsorship is if their partner is willing to take on the obligations of sponsorship, is absolutely an option. So you can apply. It gives you a way to, without going into details, gives you a way to continue working on an open work permit until your application is processed. It takes, as it stands right now, it's supposed to be processed within 1 year, but because of COVID stuff, we're up to like 16 to 18 months in a lot of cases, although some cases are getting done in under a year. It costs a little bit less, actually. It costs actually significantly less, about $1,000 overall, I think, in fees less than it does to apply in one of the economic app programs. So it can be as fast as, or even a little faster than, actually somewhat faster than an application based on one of the Quebec economic programs. It's less costly, and it allows you to remain in open work permit throughout the processing of the application. So potentially a good option. All right. So I think I'm ready to wrap up if there are no more questions. And I'd like to thank you all. It's been, I'm glad that we agreed to sort of take questions as we went along. I think it made it more interesting, hopefully for you guys. I think you were interested enough to ask relevant questions, and I do thank you for those questions. It's been interesting to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mitra Chalk, for this presentation and for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it. And for all the students, the Concordia students in the chat at the moment, if you need help with immigration related stuff, you can definitely feel free to email the clinic as well at legalclinic@csu.qc.ca.
And I also want to take a second to apologize to anyone whose name I massacred. Okay, folks. Have a good one to you too, Ken.
Thanks again. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Excuse me, is